When you wake up in a cold sweat in the middle of a dream that shakes you to your core, it leaves you with more questions than answers. Sometimes dreams have more meaning than meets the eye. Haunting whispers, creaky steps, and shadows can make you second-guess your sanity. Whether you believe in the paranormal or otherwise, these haunting murder stories will make you wonder if there is more than what we can physically see. How much stock do you place in dreams? Back in 1827, English couple Maria Martin and William Corder were planning on eloping to Ipswich and had arranged to meet at a local landmark known as the Red Barn. Martin's family later received letters from Corder claiming that they were happily married. But then Martin's stepmother began having troubling dreams that Maria had been murdered. She instructed her husband to dig in the Red Barn's grain storage bins, where he found his daughter's body. Corder was publicly executed. While the paranormal element received much attention, there may be a mundane explanation. There were rumors that Maria's stepmother was having an affair with Corder before he ran off and helped plan the murder. When 6-year-old Australian girl Kesha Abrahams went missing in 2010, Cheryl Carol Lajoie believed she had the answers. The Aboriginal elder had a dream about young Kesha and claimed that her body would be found in a nature preserve near Sydney. She and a friend traveled to the location and did indeed find a body, just not that of young Kesha. Instead, they discovered another homicide victim. The body is thought to be that of missing woman Christy McDougall, and 2 people were charged with her death. As for Kesha Abrahams, it was sadly discovered that she had been killed by her mother, who was sentenced to a maximum term of 22 years in prison. On the evening of June 24th, 1948, young Navy veteran Stanley Skridla and telephone operator Mary Jane Reed went out for a date in Oregon, Illinois. They were last seen at a local tavern around 11:30 p.m. before heading out to a local lover's lane. Their bodies were later found in separate locations. Leading suspects included Mary Jane's former beaux, but the case was never solved. However, some believe that Mary Jane's ghost haunts the tavern in which she was last seen. Shortly after buying the building, the new owner started getting odd sensations. Some employees refused to work night shifts and reported objects moving on their own. Is it possible that Mary Jane is still trying to get her case solved? In 1735, author Arthur Hayward published a book called Lives of the Most Remarkable Criminals. The following account of an apparition in Durham, England, comes from his book. One night, the bloody spirit of housekeeper Anne Walker appeared to Miller James Graham and recounted her story. She had gotten pregnant by a relation of hers, Mr. Walker, who killed her with an accomplice named Mark Sharp. Graham went to a justice of peace and had Walker's death investigated. The body was where the ghost claimed it would be, as were the belongings of Mark Sharp. Both Sharp and Walker were found guilty of the crime and sentenced to death. This story goes back to the 1977 murder of Teras Basa, a hospital employee who was found stripped, stabbed, and burned in her ransacked apartment. After weeks of investigating, the police still weren't any closer to finding the killer. Then, after 6 frustrating months, detectives received a tip about another employee at Basa's hospital named Alan Showery, a man with very suspicious initials. But who came through with the tip? Teras Basa, if you can believe it. When the police traced the call, they ended up meeting Jose and Remaichua. According to Basa, Showery showed up at Basa's apartment to fix her TV, but ended up murdering her and stealing her jewelry. When asked how they knew so much about the murder, Jose claimed that on 3 occasions, his wife had been possessed by Basa, and then explained the details of the crime. police searched Showery's apartment and found a ring and pendant belonging to Basa. They arrested Showery, who eventually pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 14 years. But while the case of Basa's murder was solved, there was still one big question concerning her spiritual call. It was quickly discovered that Ramaichua was not, as initially claimed, a total stranger. She worked in the same department of the hospital as Showery and Basa, but had lost her job just hours before the first possession supposedly happened. But that doesn't explain how she knew that Showery was a killer, and investigations into that particular factor don't have many answers. The best rational guess anyone has is that she had suspected Showery, but was scared of him and didn't know how to relay this information, except to claim a ghost made her do it. Ramai, for her part, told the jury that Basa spoke through my lips, and that all I remember is hearing the name Alan. I just felt cold and thirsty. Locals in the Hammersmith area of London became terrified after a spate of ghost sightings in the winter of 1803. The Hammersmith Ghost was said to be tall, terrifying, and clad in white. The stories got so out of hand that armed citizens began patrolling the area. One night, Francis Smith, who was out on patrol, encountered bricklayer Thomas Millwood, who was dressed in white, and mistook him for the ghost. Armed with a shotgun, Smith shot and killed Millwood. Charged with homicide, he was eventually sentenced to 1 year's hard labor. Following the trial, shoemaker John Graham came forward and admitted to being the real Hammersmith Ghost. He had been dressing in a white sheet to scare his apprentice. In 1897, a West Virginia woman named Elva Shu, wife of local blacksmith Edward Shu, was found dead by a neighbor. She was discovered lying at the foot of some stairs, her body in an awkward pose. After a cursory examination, a local doctor deemed the death natural and proceeded with her burial. And that would have been the end of the case, except that the ghost of Elva Shu was having none of it. The reason Elva was never properly examined was that Edward methodically kept anyone from inspecting her neck and head, cradling it obsessively and becoming aggressive when the coroner came anywhere near her. Then the new widower acted strangely during the funeral process, allowing only a cursory examination of the body and keeping her neck covered in a high neck dress and scarf. But despite this super suspicious behavior, the doctor didn't feel right to press the issue and listed Elva's cause of death, first as everlasting faint, and then complications from pregnancy. And because this was the 19th century, people had no trouble believing women could die merely from being women. Elva's mother, Mary Jane Heaster, hadn't liked Edward, and despite a lack of evidence, she was convinced he had murdered Elva. But given that both investigating crimes properly and taking women seriously hadn't yet been invented in 1897, Mary Jane could do nothing but pray that somehow the truth would come to light. Then, for 4 nights in a row, Elva herself supposedly appeared in Mary Jane's dreams, explaining that her husband had crushed her neck because he hadn't liked his dinner. To prove that her spinal cord had been severed, Elva's ghost turned her head around 180 degrees, then walked away while staring at Mary Jane. A creepy thing to do to your mother, but at this point, it seems clear that Elva wasn't messing around. Mary Jane took this revelation to the local law guy, John Preston, and we'll never know whether Preston believed her or simply wanted to get the crazy-sounding woman off his back. But her panicked ramblings convinced him to look into the case. After learning about Edward's strange behavior, Preston ordered the body to be exhumed. It took him about 5 seconds to conclude that indeed Edward killed Elva. However, the strangest part of the story isn't the claims of Elva haunting her mother or twisting her neck like an owl. It's that it was held up in court. During Edward's trial, Mary Jane was allowed to testify, and while it was Shu's lawyer's intention to make her look like a crazy old lady, this backfired horribly when Mary Jane stood her ground and managed to convince the jury of what she had experienced. The trial's acceptance of this ghostly evidence has led some to call it the only known case in which testimony from a ghost helped implicate a murderer, which is emblazoned on a plaque celebrating Elva Shu, who got her killer from beyond the grave. We tend to think of the average murderer as a remorseless monster. However, sometimes killers can be so haunted by their actions that they are driven to confess. In 2013, Adrian Dow confessed to the murder of Jennifer Stewart, claiming that after he committed the crime, he went for a walk and saw the ghost of his victim. Since that day, Dow claims he started believing in God and belatedly concluded that it's not a good thing to kill someone. In April 2017, serial killer Terry Childs confessed to 2 murders while serving time for 3 more. Childs says he was being eaten up by his victims Joan Mack and Christopher Hall. And no, he didn't mean in the abstract sense of overwhelming guilt. He told police they were in his cell, staring at him and eating up his brain. The 2 new crimes he confessed to occurred in 1984 and 85, and the hauntings didn't stop. In January 2017, Jose Ferreira confessed to a 1982 crime wherein he pushed 13-year-old Carrie Ann Jopek down a stairway to her death because she refused him. Her mother credits Jopek, rather than the police, for solving the crime because 33 years after she was killed, Ferreira claimed that the girl's spirit had been haunting him, and he confessed. I covered this case a few weeks ago, but I feel compelled to mention it again since it is still unsolved to this day. The Harden House is believed to be haunted by the ghost of John Harden, a native of Clermont, Florida. In 1975, he moved into it with his second wife and their newborn son. One night, he woke up to the smell of smoke and looked out to find his truck in flames. While trying to put out the fire, an unidentified person shot him in the chest. The killer was never caught. Bizarrely, 7 years earlier, in August 1968, a woman from Richmond, Virginia named June Ferris began having strange dreams of a house that she had never been to before. In them, she ran down the back staircase and out the door before waking up. In 1972, June and her family moved to Florida. 2 years later, she was driving through Clermont when she noticed an old Victorian house. A few weeks later, she and a friend went inside it. She began to experience déjà vu, in which she felt that she had been there before. When she got to the back staircase, she realized that it was the house from her dreams. The story was featured on Unsolved Mysteries and remains a compelling story to this day. Ghost stories have fascinated and captivated people throughout history and across cultures. Despite the passage of time and advancements in science and technology, the allure of the supernatural continues to intrigue and captivate individuals from all walks of life. Some ghost stories have a strong cultural and historical significance. They are often rooted in local folklore, legends, and traditional beliefs, reflecting the values, fears, and customs of a particular community. Sharing and passing down ghost stories from generation to generation helps preserve cultural heritage and creates a sense of collective identity. These tales also serve as cautionary tales, teaching moral lessons and warning against certain behaviors.